Hey guys, and welcome to another episode tutorial with me, Joseph Evans, author of the Secretary Sequence books and the Phoenix Prophecy, the Ember Effect, Soulbound, The Secret of Rain, The Last Goodbye and Glitch Girl. Okay guys, I'm going to be doing something a little different today. Instead of giving you specific coding advice, I'm going to be taking you through the process of planning out the story. And because I'm going to be using some of my own stories as examples, there will be some spoilers. So if you haven't read all of my stories yet, then I will put some spoiler warnings on the screen so you can skip ahead. Now, the first question you may have is, do I even need to plan my story? And the answer is not necessarily, but I would recommend it. There are two types of writers out there. Those are planners and pantsers. A planner is obviously somebody who plans out a story, and a pantser is somebody who flies by the seat of their pants, meaning they just start writing with no idea where it's going and just see where they end up. While being a pantser may work for some writers, George R.R. Martin is one of them, I'm firmly in the plotter camp, and I would recommend that you are too if you're just starting out. By choosing to plan your story, you give yourself three very important advantages. Those being, 1, you can foreshadow twists, 2, your pacing will be better, and 3, you're much less likely to get writer's block. Now, you can either do your planning on your computer, on your mobile device, or on good old-fashioned paper. Because I spend so much of my time on my laptop, I choose to do all of my planning in notebooks. I use these beautiful notebooks by a company called Paper Blanks because they look like really ancient magical tomes. I just love the style of them. But you can use any old notebook. If you do want to use the exact same ones that I use, then I will put the link to these in the description below. So, you have a blank page of some kind. Where on earth do you start? Well, the key is to think really broadly and then to kind of keep narrowing down until you've got enough detail that you can start writing. Think of it almost like a painting where you have these big, huge broad strokes and then you keep kind of fine-tuning until everything comes together. Here are some examples of the broader strokes that you could start with. The love interest is a demon hunter of some kind, and unbeknownst to him, the main character is one of those demons. The MC moves to a new school and finds out that her new friend group is keeping a huge secret from her. The MC was injured in an explosion and now has the ability to manipulate electronic devices with her mind. She teams up with an inventor to become a superhero duo. Now, of course, if you guys are fans of my stories, you will recognise these as being The Secret of Rain, The Last Goodbye, and of course, Glitch Girl. At this early stage, you don't even need names for your characters. I often just refer to them as things like MC for main character, LI for love interest, and then just parent, friend, etc. All you need is a basic premise. If you're struggling to put your ideas into a cohesive sentence like this, then think about how you would pitch your story to a publisher. It needs to be as concise and clear as possible. The hook really needs to be very obvious. Once you've got this, you're then going to need to come up with your conclusion. For example, it turns out that the demons aren't evil at all. The love interest was being fooled into believing this was the case, so now their love interest and the main character can live happily ever after. The friends group eventually reveal all, and it brings all of the friends and the main character closer together. It turns out the inventor love interest was actually responsible for the explosion, and the main character uses the powers that he gave her to defeat him. You can choose to have your ending be a happy one, a sad one, or maybe even a bittersweet one. The most important thing to think about is how this conclusion will affect your characters, specifically the main character. It's usually a good idea to have the main character changed in some way at the end, because readers love to feel like they've kind of gone on a life-changing journey with the characters that they're reading about. Now, of course, this is episode we're talking about, so you may want to have multiple endings. Now, if this is the case, then I would recommend thinking specifically about how each ending differs from each other, but also remembering to have each one still have that main character changed in some way in each of those endings. Once you've got your setup and your conclusion, then it's time to start thinking about how you get your characters from A to B, and this will make up pretty much the main bulk of your planning. And it really doesn't matter what order you do this in. I think one big misconception about writing is that you have to write chronologically when you're planning and when you're writing your actual manuscript. My planning is all over the place. I encourage you to be messy at this stage. On the same page in my notebook, I might come up with something that happens in episode 4, as well as something that happens in episode 34. I encourage you to scribble things out. If you're working digitally, then maybe put a strike through it, or maybe just change something to a different color. Write down things that don't even make any sense at all, and write down things that you're not ready to commit to just yet, because you don't have to. One of the most frequent words that I use when I'm planning is the word maybe. I'll write things like, maybe the main character falls out with the love interest at a restaurant. Maybe the masked villain is somebody the MC actually knows. Or maybe the best friend goes after the love interest, even though she knows it would hurt the main character. At some point during this stage, you're probably naturally going to come up with names for your characters, so you don't have to keep calling them things like MC and LI. Now, the good thing about coming up with names at this late stage is that if you want to, you can actually give them names that have some connection to the plot. Anyone that's read the Phoenix Prophecy will know that the name Phoenix has a very, very strong connection to that character's story arc. Once you have a decent overall picture of your story, it's time to move on to the refining part. This is where you will settle on the ideas that you think work best and properly discard the ones that you think are no good. I find a really good way to make these decisions is by asking questions. I'll write something along the lines of this. Lucy specifically needs to be in the potions classroom for Professor Toadstool to give her detention. What reason could she have for being in the potions classroom at this time? And then I'll come up with a scenario that solves that problem. How about she's secretly making a love potion to give to the love interest the very next day? Eventually, you're going to have enough notes to be able to break the story down into very, very specific plot points. I'd recommend using bullet points or dashes to list every important thing that happens in the story from start to finish. The penultimate step is going even finer with your tuning and making an episode by episode breakdown. I would recommend writing episode 1, episode 2, episode 3 and so forth, and then putting, I would say, at least 5 bullet points beneath each episode name, listing the main things that happen in each of those episodes. If you have multiple endings, then I would add in subheadings and create bullet points underneath each of those subheadings. Finally, you'll probably want to plan out some of your choices that the player can make. Now, this step is actually optional. You don't need to plan any of your choices at all if you don't want to. But I would recommend probably planning at least one choice per episode, especially if you're going to be charging users gems for them. So again, underneath those bullet points, I would add in just one choice that you think is going to be quite impactful for that particular episode. Now, my specific advice for coming up with ideas for choices is to think of something that seems quite impactful but actually doesn't cause the story to branch out quite wide, because I've experimented with wide branching and narrow branching, and I can tell you that narrow branching, when done right, is way better for the writer. Of course, the key is to make a narrow branch appear like it's going to send the story in very different directions, but it actually only kind of widens the story a little bit before going back on the same path. If you do narrow branching correctly, then it should be just as satisfying for the reader as something that causes the story to branch off it really wide, and it will be way easier for you to actually write. So that's it, guys. Obviously, this is just how I plan my own stories. What works for me is not necessarily what's going to work for you. If this is your first time planning a story, what I would recommend is following my guide, and then as you do, just adjust it how you want, and the more plans you make for the more stories you make, the more you will get a feel for what works for you. There's no exact science to it. It's really just one big feeling out process that can be loosely organized if you want it to be. Okay, if this tutorial has helped you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notifications button so you don't miss any of the tutorials that I've got coming up. And if you'd like to support me and get some exciting rewards in return, then head over to my Patreon page, patreon.com/author Joseph Evans. Or you can click the join button underneath this video. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to comment them down below, and if you know the answer to anybody else's questions or you think you can give them advice, then it would be awesome if you could give them a quick answer to help them out. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Good luck planning your own episode stories, and I will see you all in my next video.